Devil worship in France. R. The Question of Lucifer, a record of things seen and heard in the secret societies, according to the evidence of initiates. And so we're in part 3, are we? The doctor states plainly that one thing only has preserved the place from the doom of the cities of the plain, and that is the presence of certain good Christians, otherwise Catholics, in what he terms the accursed city. For himself he tarried only to witness the initiation of a mistress Templar according to the Palladian rite, which took place in a Presbyterian church, chapel. The Presbyterian persuasion, as he tells us, being one of the broad roads leading to avowed Satanism. Yes, because arranging elders in your society outside of the Catholic system of elders, of priesthood authority, that's particularly demonic. The password was appropriately the name of the first murderer, and the doctor was greeted, to his great astonishment, by an old acquaintance, an English pastor whom he had frequently seen upon his own magnificent steamboat, who also rejoiced in the nickname of the Reverend Alcohol, being like the majority of Englishmen, almost invariably drunk. The ceremony of initiation, which is described at great length in the narrative, is a variation from that of Leo Taxil, the doctor, and mercy to his readers, suppressing a part of the performance. Speaking generally, it was concerned, as we have previously seen, with an anti-Christian version of the gospel history, and some commonplace outrages of the Eucharistic elements, so during which proceedings our witnesses perspired freely. So, as he tells us, did one more Protestant pass over to the worship of Lucifer. Well, Dante and Milton, and the fact that it was used as a church slander, and didn't erase the fact that Lucifer was still being used as a title for Jesus and still being used as a title for a planet itself. But the operations of the ritual were followed by a divine solemnity, which had something of the character of an ordinary spiritual seance, supposing it to have been held in a madhouse. I need only to say that when the lights were turned up at the end, every article of furniture, including a large organ, was discovered hanging from the ceiling. As a final phenomenon, the master of the ceremonies detached his shadow from his substance, arranging it against the wall in the shape of a demon, and it responded to various questions by signs. There was a burst of loud applause. The proceedings terminated, and the Masonic temple became once more a Presbyterian chapel. 7. San Ho Hell. The doctor informs us that China is the gate of hell, and that all its inhabitants are born damned, childlike and bland in appearance. The Chinaman is invariably, by disposition, a Satanist, having taste wholly diabolical. Yeah, pork and whatnot, apparently. Well, the red, cover them with the blood of Christ. Isn't that, a lot worse than the whole isn't that more, disturbing to the natural person than, of course, Christians take off the natural person, so the Chinese natural, and they're okay with the color red, Anyways, as to the religion of Buddha, it is simply Satanism à outrance. Chinese occultism is centralized on the Sanho Hai, an association parallel to high-grade Masonry, having its headquarters in Pekin and welcoming all Freemasons who are affiliated to the Palladium. It does not, however, admit women, and it has only one degree. Its chief occupation is to murder Catholic missionaries. never heard of any proof of a lot of these claims, but when a Palladian Mason seeks admission for the first time to one of its assemblies, he betakes himself to the nearest opium den, carrying on his person the documents which prove his initiation. He places his umbrella, head downwards, on his left side, and stupefies himself with the divine drug. Yes, yes, because alcohol, which is, and tobacco, which are more likely to cause schizophrenia and death than straight up opium. Oh, that must be the evil drug. Us in the West, we smoke and drink, but everything else, evil. Oh, don't smoke opium. Don't smoke marijuana. It's like hypocrisy. He is then quite sure that he will be transported in a comatose condition to the occult reunion. When the doctor reached Shanghai, he experienced some hesitation before he attempted an adventure so uncertain in its issue. He remembered, however, that he was possessed of a miraculous medal of St. Benedict, which he regarded as his trump card, a species of passport or return ticket available at any date and by any line of doubledom. He determined to get drunk accordingly, but even as he entered Masonry, with a becoming reservation of conscience, as he entered the drug shop, with a reservation as to the degree of his drunkenness, in spite of which he fell, however, into a deep sleep, and awoke in the assembly of the secret avengers, one of whom, to felicitate proceedings, had a good knowledge of English and a perfect familiarity with all Charleston passwords. The Baphomet, of course, proceeded, but it appears that the Chinese have certain conscientious scruples on the subject of goats, and hence a dragon's head was substituted for that of the ordinary image. The doctor was not the only European present at the proceedings of the Celestial Assembly, but while he was the sole representative of his own nation, it goes without saying, there was a fair sprinkling of the abominable British. So complete is the anonymity which obtains between the initiates of China and Charleston, that the bulk of the proceedings takes place in the English language. But for this disposition of Providence, the doctor would have been at serious disadvantage. The first object of the company was to encompass the destruction of missionaries, and for this purpose a coffin was presently brought in, containing the skeleton of a deceased brother, who had so far diverged from duty that he had entered in league with the Jesuits, and had dared to act as a spy against the august proceedings of the sublime society of avengers. The first act may be regarded as somewhat bizarre in character. It consisted in evoking an evil spirit to animate the skeleton, and to answer certain questions. This was accomplished with absolute success. The bones of the departed brother had, however, been so consecrated by his Jesuitical proclivities that, even when animated by a devil, they discovered extreme reluctance in disclosing the number and quality of certain Franciscan zealots who had just started from Paris to convert the empire. Ultimately, however, it was admitted that they were now on the high seas, which information given, the bony oracle could no longer contain its rage, but persuaded an English mason of the 33rd degree from end to end of the assembly, and has succeeded in inflicting some furious bites and blows. And aside from this culture of personal power, I guess, that can be achieved, and in touch with the natural world, one of the problems that the Chinese had with the Christian missionaries, other than their arrogance that, oh, we're better than you, your ways are worthless, not accepting the good and truth in all paths, was what largely people got. One of the things, Chinese, the word for death, so a cross, was not a symbol that went over well with the majority of the Chinese people. The second act commenced by uncovering a species of exaggerated baptismal font, filled to the brim with water, and representing the great ocean of which missionaries were passing. The assembly crowded round it, and by means of magic rods and other devices succeeded in evoking a minute figure of a steamship containing the adventurers. Their magic also raised up a perfect tempest of wind in the closed apartment, but by no device could they effect the slightest disturbance upon the placid bosom of the water. The ceremony had, in fact, to be abandoned as a failure in its desired intention. Too well did the spirit Yasu protect his missionary. Yesu is Jesus, but remember, I've got a Antiquity Unveiled. I'll share that book later. In 1441, probably, yeah. Um, the assembly accordingly repaired into a second apartment. There the officiating dignitaries assumed the vestments of Catholic priests. They produced a wax figure destined to represent a missionary, amused themselves with a mock trial, inflicted imaginary tortures, and returned the dummy to a cupboard, after which they proceeded to the crucifixion of a living pig. The third act was an antagonizing experience for the doctor, being nothing less than the sacrifice of one of the brethren, the selection being determined by lot. The doctor, in his quality of visitor, was, it is true, spared the chance of being himself the victim, but he nearly became the executioner, one of the Chinese adepts having been chosen, to his intense satisfaction and approved by some mechanical movements on the part of the dragon-headed Baphomet, permitted his limbs to be removed, and then earnestly invoked assistance of the Charleston brother. For the purpose of severing his head, it was an honor invariably accorded to the visitor of the highest grade. The doctor, who could not bring himself to the point, was saved at the last moment by the miraculous levitation of A.E.Waite. From an immense distance, the occult personage, having become transcendently cognizant of what was going forward in China, and being anxious to interrogate the severed head as to the possible recovery of his daughter, which was then seriously ill, in virtue of his superior dignity, he claimed the privilege of the execution, and the doctor modestly retired. Such were the adventures of our witness in the Assembly of Holy Avengers. He enumerates at length the evidence against hallucination as a result of his excess in opium, but I suggest to observing readers that there is a more obvious line of criticism. And see, when you see the Christians, if they talk about Lucifer as being a name for the devil, if you know what it means, and you say, well, oh, a being that's like enlightening us and calling us towards nature, is like, oh, well, that's the good one. So you see that people who worship Lucifer as a non, you know, if that's what they say of the devil, are like the number two devil, I guess. This is something that people would naturally gravitate towards, but not in terms of, anyways. The great city of Lucifer. It was in March of the year 1881 that Dr. Battelle proceeded for the first time to Charleston to make acquaintance at headquarters with the Universal Masonry of Lucifer and its pontiff Albert Pike. Charleston is the Venice of America, the Rome of Satan, and the great city of Lucifer, always enormously prolix, and adoring the details which swell the flimsy issues of cheap periodical narratives. Our witness describes at length the city and its Masonic temple, with the temple which is within the temple, and it's consecrated to the good God. Well, the consecrated to the good God part is definitely what people intend, what's best, My second chapter has already provided the reader with sufficient information upon the persons alleged to be consecrated in the foundation of the Universal Freemasonry and the elaboration of its cultus. Nor need I dwell at any length upon the personal communication which I passed between Dr. Battelle, Albert Pike, Gallatin Mackey, Sophia Walder, Chambers, Weber, and the rest of the Charleston luminaries. Mrs. Walder explained to him the great hope of the order concerning the speedy advent of Antichrist and the abolition of the papacy and the destruction of the Christian religion. She also related many of her private experiences with the infernal monarchy, being acquainted with the exact number of demons and the descending hierarchy, and with all their classes and legions, she confidently expected to be the grandmother of Antichrist, and in the meantime possessed the transcendental faculty of becoming fluidic at will. Mr. Gallatin Mackey exhibited his Arcula Mystica, one of 7 similar instruments existing at Charleston, Rome, Berlin, Washington, Montevideo, Naples, and Calcutta. To all appearance, it resembled a liquor stand, but it was really a diabolical telephone, worked like the Urim and Thummim, and enabling those who possessed it to communicate with each other. And whatever is the intervening distance, the doctor, in his quality of initiate, was, of course, taken over the entire premises. He examined the head of the great Templar Malay, deciding by its anthropological knowledge that the relic was not genuine, and that it was not the skull of a European. As to the Templar Baphomet situated in the Sanctum Regnum, and before which Lucifer is supposed to appear, it is sufficient to say that the Dr. Patilda, who invariably treads cautiously where it is easy for other steps to follow him, has no personal testimony to furnish upon the subject of apparition, and the relations of other persons do not concern us at the moment. And so, one thing, excuse the interruption, but I thought I would show you without the little silver dots. Apparently, someone was going to give me a deal, and it was still too much to handle. The Urim and Thummim is something. It's not just Latter-day Saint literature. You have 8-sided crystals, right? And you take 2 of them. The light and perfection. There's other meanings we can have, but when I do a video on that, Joseph Smith had a pair of these fixed in a bow, and he kind of wore them like glasses and stared into them. And so you'd end up with 2 dice like this. You'd end up with 16. You'd end up with 16 things being said. And the Bible makes clear that, that it was a throwing of the dice. And the Canaanites had a system of Urim and Thummim, and that's been preserved. And, well, they weren't really Canaanites. They weren't really Palestinians. That's not really a historical argument that a person could really make. But, so when you read those passages, it's like scrying, the gazing with dice. So 2 oracles in one would be the process shown there. So I thought that was important to point out as a side note. 9. Transcendental toxicology. The memorials of Charleston are not entirely favorable to the true strength of our witness. It was requisite to lie low in America, but the doctor bristles in Gibraltar. He is once more upon British soil. Does not the Englishman, consciously or otherwise, put a curse on everything he touches? Dr. Batil affirms it. Indeed, this quality of malediction has been specifically dispensed to the nation of heretics by God himself. So says Dr. Batil, since the British braggart began to embattle Gibraltar, being thieved it from Catholic Spain, a wind of desolation breezed over the whole country. An inscrutable providence, of which our witness is the mouthpiece, has elected to set apart this rock, in order that the devil and the English, who, he says, are a pair, may continue their work of Protestantizing and filling the world with malfeas. To sum up the whole matter, the Britisher is an odious usurper who has always got one eye open, now having regard to the fact that out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation, a proportion to be numbered by millions, is given over to devil worship and masonry. They're two different things. And that consequently, there's an enormous demand for Baphomets and other idols, for innumerable instruments of black magic, and for poisons to exterminate enemies. And it is obviously needful that there should be a secret central department for working of woods and metals and for transcendental toxicology. And I wouldn't moralize the terms white magic and black magic. Certainly, a witch, somebody who is in league with demons, can orchestrate power towards both ends. And same thing with a spiritual connection, the art and science of spirituality or religion. Doesn't have to be witchcraft or demonolatry or demonism or pagan Satanism, or it doesn't have to be in that context either. So let's be careful about over-moralizing terminology. To Charleston, the dogmatic directory; to Gibraltar, the universal factory. But so colossal an output focused at a single point could scarcely proceed unknown to government at a given place, and at any nation save England might object to this class of exports. The cause of masonry and the devil being, however, dear to the English heart, it would of course pass unchallenged at Gibraltar, and at this point an Anglophobe, with the remnant of reason, would have remained satisfied. Not so our French physician, who affirms that the exports in question do not merely escape inquisition at the hands of civil authority, but are in fact a government industry. Bluish mid the burning water, full in face, Trafalgar lay. In the dimmest northeast distance dawned Gibraltar, grand and grey. Here and here did England help me. How can I help England say? These are the words of Browning, and his question has well been answered by the institution of the secret workshops and secret laboratory. As in most other cases, England has helped herself, unless indeed it should occur to the doctor that the poet was a Satanist, like Pike, who himself was a poet and had a chief finger in the pie. Now the great historic rock is tunneled by innumerable caverns, which our deponent witnesses have never been explored by the tourist. And in the most impracticable portions of the great subterranean maze, whosoever has the audacity to penetrate will discover for himself the existence of the industrial department of diabolism. But he must not expect to come back unless he be a sovereign grand master ad vitam and an initiate of Lucifer. The doctor has explored these caverns and has seen the factory in full working order, has exhaustively described the way in, has returned from the gulf like Dante, and has given away the whole mystery, possessed of his key to the labyrinth. And the wayfaring man shall not err therein, and it will, no doubt, be a new curiosity for the more daring among Cook's tourists. The workshops are supplied with mechanics by a simple expedient. Hopeless specimens of English malefactors, condemned to penal servitude for the term of their natural life, are regulated to this region, a kind of grim humor characterizing the selection. The most hideous convicts are chosen, and those most corresponding in outward appearance to the favorite devils of the hierarchy, under whose names they pass in the workshops, where they commonly communicate with each other in the language of Volapuk. Volapuk? The reason given is that this language has been adopted by the A.E.Waite, which I confess I had not heard of previously, but I venture to think that the doctor has concealed the true reason, and that the Volapuk has been thus chosen because it is a diabolical invention. A universal language prevailed previously to the confusion of Babel, and the new language is an irreligious attempt to produce oro ab chaos by return to unity of speech. Oh, everybody's speaking the same language. That's evil. Languages that we've caused into extinction don't exist. That never happened. It's no, that happened all over the place. Thousands of languages disappeared because of colonialism. and following the colonialist is the Teutonic language. There was even a language in Iran that was speaking called Teutonic, and they thought Arabic, Farsi, English, and but they wanted to get away with one of the. Was this in the '60s that they kind of '60s that under the pro-Western leader? But it is possible that spirits would know languages before Babel, kind of. But the idea of these things being secret, what the Masons are looking for, and all this other stuff, use your common sense, people. Use your common sense. You look back, even before the modern time, one of the public knew. Here's a list of Freemason grades. Here's their insignias, and you can order them. But you basically had to prove you're a Mason as a rule to get a hold of these things. And it wasn't that I really want to move my way up in Masonry, and I don't want to just be accepted. And it's like they kind of vote you in. They don't just oh, sorry, my foot on the thing here. The toxicology department is worked by a higher class of criminals, as for example, absconding trustees who are there comfortably settled in life, enjoying many modern conveniences. It produces poisons, which usually cause death by cerebral hemorrhage, but each has its special antidote, possessed of which the initiated poisoner can eat and drink with his victim. On the subject, the doctor pursues, however, a policy, a masterly reticence, but such is brief in the deep mystery of Gibraltar. Such is the toxicology department of Universal Freemasonry. And the reason why I have vervain, for example, is not, I'm going to eat it and then vampires will not be able to feed on me. I don't believe that. So that's not why I have vervain. Thank you very much. 10. The Doctor and Diana, which, of course, is going to be the subject of a further chapter and more about Book 2, which will not be shared because it was not published until my lifetime. It would be impossible to follow the Doctor through the entire course of his memoirs. Not that they are wholly biographical, exclusively concerned with modern diabolism, are, with the great conspiracy of Masons against God, man, and the universe, one of his subsidiary and yet most important objects to fill space, in which respect he has almost eclipsed the great classics of the penny dreadful in England. I must pass with a mere reference over his dealings in Spiritism. It is needless to say that in this branch of transcendental investigation he witnessed more astounding phenomena than falls commonly to the lot of even veteran students. His star prevailed everywhere, and the world unseen deployed its strongest forces. At Montevideo, for example, falling casually into the circle of spiritualists, he was seated, surrounded by a family of these unconscious and amateur dabblists, before an open window at night time, across the broad mouth of the river, a great shaft of soft light from the lamp of the lighthouse opposite shone in mid-air over the bosom of the water, and as it fell upon their faces, he discerned floating within the beam itself the solid figure of a man. It was not the first time that the apparition, under similar circumstances, had been seen by the rest of the household, but for him it bore a message of deeper mystery than for these uninitiated spiritualists. Although in man's clothes, his observant eye recognized the face of the spirit. Terrible and suggestive truth. It was the face of the Vestal Virgin, who, far off in Calcutta, had fluidified in the third temple, and he uttered a great cry. He has now decided to void the virginity of the Vestal, and assume that she was in reality a demon, and not being of earth. Well, humans can choose to become demons. At the same time, my reader must thoroughly understand that the doctor, when he meddles in spiritualism, is a man who is governed in his narratives by an intelligent faculty of criticism which borders on the purely skeptic. He delights at the display of instances where an element of trickery may be detected. No one better than himself can distinguish between bogus and bogey, and he takes the pleasure in directing special attention to his extraordinary good judgment and sound common sense in each and all these matters. Hence, no one will be surprised to hear that a house of a lady in London, an extraordinary table, after a preliminary performance in Tilling transformed suddenly into a full-grown crocodile and played touchingly on the piano, after which it again changed into a table. But the gin, the whisky, the pale ale, and other intoxicants which are indispensable at seances in England have been entirely consumed by the transcendental reptile to fortify him on his return journey to the mud banks of the Nile. Nor has this spontaneous apparition been wanting to complete the experiences of Dr. Battelle. He was seated in his cabin at midnight, pondering over the theories formulated in natural history by Cuvier and Darwin, who diabolized the entire creation, when he was touched lightly on the shoulder and discovered standing over him in his picturesque oriental costume. Oh, I should have had an oriental costume, shouldn't I? Like another Mohini, the Arab poisoner-in-chief of the Gibraltar Toxicological Department, who, after some honorable assurances that the Bible was not true, departed transcendently as he came. The personage subsequently proved to be the demon Hermes, even when he merely personified. The doctor had unheard of experiences in magic, for example, at the Golden Square in the west central district of this wicked city, an address we have heard of before. At the conclusion of an ordinary lodge meeting, there was an evocation of the demon Zarin, who appeared under the form of a monstrous three-headed dragon completely cased in steel, and endeavoring to devour his evoker was restrained by the magical pentagram, ultimately vanishing with a peculiar odor of infernus. In connection with various marvels, the doctor had to tell us concerning two sisters in Lucifer, who have long been at daggers drawn, considering their supernatural attributes is incomprehensible in a high degree that they have not destroyed one another like the magician and the princess of a more credible narrative of wonders in the Arabian Nights. Diana Vaughan, much heard and little seen, has since become famous in her conversion to the Catholic faith, honored with her acquaintance